Dragon Ballers, if you're looking to buy Dragon Ball Super or One Piece sealed product, make sure to get 5% off using my link to Mystic TCG down in the description. You can also sell cards to them using their Facebook link, which is also down in the description. Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going over some top cards for January 2023, and I'm not sure if I'm going to title this top tech cards or top sideboard cards. Normally every month we do a top sideboard cards to get you guys prepared for different matchups, but since we're in kind of like the off season, everyone's pretty much just playing at their locals or online, so we're probably playing a lot of best of one right now, so maybe I'll just title it tech cards. You can of course main these cards if you think that you need help in certain matchups that these cards are leaning towards, but as always, these will be cards that are going to be good for your side deck, so take it as you will. Use it in the context of whatever tournament you're playing in, but we'll go into all that in today's video. If you guys are new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video, and if you guys do want to help support the channel and you're looking to buy into the cards we talk about in today's video, it does greatly help me out if you use my TCG player link down in the description. It is a free way to help the channel if you are going to buy cards anyway. Anyways, let's get on into this, talking about the first card, and that is Deborah, Ritual at Hand. Now, this is a card that I would 110% recommend sideboarding going forward because green stocks are on the rise. This is a card for a while that you could get away without siding, but if you ran into green, depending on the deck you're playing, you might be in a bit of trouble, but I do expect to see a lot more green in the very near future. Between all the hype that Cooler generated from taking second place Australian Nationals, having a very good run seemingly against Crimson Goku, to the fact that before we even knew it, that deck is getting support in the Zenkai Dash Pack. Like, that deck already just had a great showing at a national tournament and then just got some random support on top. So I expect that deck to be very popular and pretty solid going forward. And I've also heard a lot of hype surrounding green Gotenks because that deck seems like it can do well into Crimson too. These just, you know, hand control-y green decks, not like Cell Surge level of hand control, but just these decks are able to poke at the hand, are going to be annoying for blue and I would say even yellow decks to deal with. So I do think Deborah is a bit more of a staple-ish sideboard card, or main deck tech if you want to go with that route, than it has been in the past. So I definitely wanted to recommend it first and foremost. Then we have Makikabora, the Broken Seal. Now, this is one that I talk about every side decking video because it's just that staple-ish. You can use this for a variety of different things. If you're going to play against green Gotenks, for example, you can call Gotenk 6-drop, and honestly, you turn off a good majority of their high-octane plays, but I think this card is particularly good in blue decks, namely Crimson right now, because in Crimson, it essentially costs 1, and this can be somewhat of a replacement to God Sealing Technique, where you're able to call out their bomb. And this requires you to know what your opponent's strategy does in a pretty intricate way. So if you're newer to the game or newer to competitive Dragon Ball, I wouldn't recommend going with this necessarily, but I do think this could be a good like 1 to 2 of main board card in a lot of Crimson decks. Definitely sideboard applicable in most strategies, again requiring that matchup knowledge, knowing what your opponent's playing and what cards they rely on. But yeah, this can stop secret rares, this can stop cards that have deflect from ever being played. So I do think it's a really solid option in this upcoming format, where it seems like answers to bigger bombs are a little bit more scarce than they have been in the past, mostly because of that God Sealing Technique hit. Then we have a new slew of cards that I haven't really talked about much in the past, but I've mentioned them in a few profiles here and there, and I've been liking them more and more, and that is the cards like God Slicing Black Kamehameha and Dark Death Ball. There's basically a slew of these types of counterplays. I think every color has them. I'm not sure if black does, but anyways, for most of the colors, they have a card of this where it's a counterplay. You have to have a unison in play to activate it, and you have the ability to activate them for free by discarding 2 cards. Now, that discard cost is pretty heavy, I won't lie, but it's a really nice way to save on tempo. It's a nice way to not to spend energy and get a counterplay out and then continue the rest of your turn. And the majority of the time, these are going to be used to counterplay your opponent's floodgates. One option that I've really been liking in blue is God Slicing Black Kamehameha. In my Crimson build, I talked about this in a recent Patreon article. This is a good answer to floodgates, and the great thing about God Slicing is that it also draws a card on top of the rest of its ability, so that discard cost is even less of a big deal if you are to play this in a blue deck. And that was one of the main things that Godsling was used for, right, before it was banned, was to answer floodgates and the occasional bomb your opponent would play that didn't have deflect. Most bombs in current Dragon Ball Super, at least in the metagame, do have deflect, so a lot of times you're using God Sealing to stop your opponent's Ready to Rumble or Gohan Baby's Minion, whatever the card was, and I'm really liking God Slicing Black Kamehameha as an answer to those types of cards. I also wanted to shine some light on Dark Death Ball because I feel like a lot of these green decks have a lot of dead cards in hand at certain points. Like Cooler, of course, you have 1.5 million unisons, but you can combo those if you need to. But you also have extra cards like Dormant Potential, Shocking Death Ball if you're playing it, Homicidal Clones that maybe you can't really use at the time. And when I'm playing green Gotenks, I have all those cards, plus like extra copies of unisons that I can't really do anything with. So I think Dark Death Ball in green is also a great option because a lot of those decks do play a lot of unisons, and they're able to get rid of the dead cards in their hand, again, while saving tempo, which I think is really good. The one for red is not all that great. From what I remember, it only stops the play of a 15k or less, so that one might not be too playable. But the one for yellow, I think, brings the card in rest mode and negates its skills, so that's also pretty decent for stopping certain floodgates. So I did want to shine some light on these specific pool of cards that I think are actually worth revisiting and taking a look at with some fresh eyes. Then we have Dende, new to the job. This is one that I don't talk about in a lot of side decking videos, even though ramp has been pretty prominent the past few sets. But I think we need more answers to ramp now. Again, with the God Sealing hit, we're not really going to be able to do too much to the SS4 Vegeta Rise of the Super Warrior, at least in most colors. So I think having an answer to ramp is pretty important. This card is really nice, namely in Crimson Goku or any blue leader that can manipulate energy, because it ends up costing less than 3. Dende can be very steep for a lot of decks to use, and I probably wouldn't recommend using Dende if it pretty much takes your whole turn to use it. But if you're in a deck like blue that has energy manipulation, or if you're playing a deck that has a fair amount of free plays or maybe 1 energy plays, I would definitely recommend using Dende, because I do think putting those ramp decks back a turn can be really nice. This is also really good against Gamma as well, even though they're not really a ramp deck, but they do a lot of manipulating of their energy and make a lot of plays out of their energy. And suffice to say, there's also pretty decent against Android 16 as well. And what you can do is you can hit the best play out of their energy, and it's almost like you took a card out of their hand, funnily enough. And in the Gamma matchup, sometimes they struggle to have a lot of blue-greens in energy. So if you hit their only blue-green in the energy and they don't have another one for the next turn, they've lost their ability to play their Cell Boss Monster, their Android 17-18 dual attacker. So a Dende at the right time can be really backbreaking, but you got to make sure you're playing it in the correct deck that can actually facilitate it and not just straight up give up a whole turn just to use it. So I want you to keep that in mind for sure. Then we have Death Blaster. So this is a card that I kind of think a lot of yellow decks are just going to main deck for almost the rest of time, just because it is now the only answer to those bigger boss monsters that don't have deflect, like the SS4 Vegeta Rise of the Super Warriors and the Perfect Force Cells. This is now the only card, and it makes yellow the only color that can actually deal with these boss cards effectively. Obviously, it's a lot different than the ability to use God Sealing, because that card was used for free. This card costs 2, but yellow decks do typically play a mid-rangey / control-y game. So if you're not on the train of main decking Death Blaster yet, you definitely got to get on the horn of at least side decking the card. It's just that important, that good. And yellow, I think, is going to become that color that people play, because they don't want to deal with, ramp decks. They don't want to deal with hand control decks. They want to be able to answer those boss monsters, and they're going to be willing to leave up more energy to do so. And against any color that's not red, it's honestly perfectly fine to leave up 2-3 energy to play defense and regain the tempo of the game, as long as you're not getting Broly Crown. So I do think this is going to be the direction that yellow takes, and that's why this video is almost like tech card talk instead of like sideboard talk, but this can go either way. Again, I do think that a lot of yellow players are going to adopt Death Blaster in the main deck at like 2 copies for almost the rest of the time, but that's maybe a hot take. Time will remain to tell on that one. Then we have the Cunning cards. These cards have picked up in popularity. A lot of people were playing these at the recent national tournaments, and that is pretty much just to interact with the SSB Kaioken Goku United Divinity SCR. This card is really good against those. I will say it's not impossible for a Crimson player to just play through this, though. I played Crimson with that SCR in my deck in nationals, and I was sometimes warping 10, 15, 20 cards from my drop to do what I had to do, but it still puts like a pretty big limitation on your opponent, because then they have to give out their Overwhelm, or obviously sometimes they don't have the drop area to be doing this. So the Cunnings are still very good, and it does also technically interact with the Gohan Beast SCR in the sense that it makes it costly for them if they want to untap energy with their SCR, which sometimes those players want to do. So the Cunning cards do seem like they're still in a pretty solid spot, even though they kind of only hit SCRs, but they're still 1-drop cantrips at the end of the day, so they're not really all that bad in general. And then we have the opposite end of the blue servo bullets, and that is Son Gohan Changing History. These are the types of cards that specifically punish things like Dimension Magic, or maybe Revenge Big Bang Attack if you're up against the Blue Baby control deck. But yeah, these cards are very punishing for Crimson. Crimson happens to main deck their equivalent of this, which is Borgos. and that's just because it's a blue stand with barrier, and it just so happens to have a great effect against blue decks. So we know that those types of cards are very effective against Crimson, essentially shutting off their dimension magics, because almost every Crimson player is not going to want you to kill one of their energy and kill one of their lives, right? So with that in mind, you are actually limiting their defenses pretty heavily, and I think that these are especially good in red and black aggressive decks that can really apply the pressure following up on your opponent not being able to untap via dimension magic. That seems like a really good situation to be in. I think I've made that type of comment in the past as well, that these types of cards are probably best suited in the decks that can apply the most pressure, but I still do think that, like in a green deck, if you can you know, put your opponent on a crunch for energy, you can still probably take pretty good advantage of the matchup. But yeah, these cards seem really solid, so you know, take your pick for blue silver bullets or play both. They all do seem really good, and at the end of the day, they are just cantrips, so you can't really go wrong for the most part. And then we have Heavenly Wizard Demigra, just a good card against Sin Shenron. That deck took a really big hit with the recent ban list, and probably a justified hit in my opinion, but that deck is still going to be able to play a very big 8-drop on turn 3 that has barrier, and it's going to be very difficult to swing through that because they have an activate battle that's going to let it basically kill a guy once per battle, or once per turn during a battle, I should say. So having the Heavenly Wizard Demigra to just kill that thing ignoring barrier in the early turns is probably going to be pretty helpful for the right strategy. So just wanted to point attention to it. Don't forget about the Sin deck. It's probably still going to be pretty decent. I think it's still one of the top red decks in my opinion. And then wrapping up the video talking about Koitsukai. This is probably more side deck than ever like main deck tech, but it's still really solid. It's good coverall. If you don't want to play the cards like the God Slicings or the Dark Death Balls and you want to have a decent card to bring in against Floodgates, Koitsukai is a great option because they can still play the Floodgate, but they are going to lose 2 cards from hand for doing so. And it's a good coverall against the arrival decks like the Launches, the red-blue Coolers of the world. So this is a good card for those scenarios as well. But that's going to wrap it up for today's video, guys. If you have any hot techs, drop them down in the comments below. Let's see what you guys are working with. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.